It started with a lens I never agreed to. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, had installed security cameras in my home while I was recovering from a fall. At first, she claimed it was for my safety, to check in on me. That's what she told my son, Mark. But she never told me where they were, or that they had audio. The first time I caught a glimpse of the little black dot above my fireplace, I felt a ripple of unease. I hadn't noticed it before. And then, in the guest bathroom, tucked discreetly near the vent, another one. They were watching me. Listening. And they didn't think I knew. I played along. I smiled during phone calls, nodded during weekly visits. Rachel would wave to the camera as she left, laughing as she said, "Just keeping an eye on our favorite man." But she wasn't checking on my health. She was checking on my sanity. I started finding things in odd places. My mail was rearranged. My medications felt tampered with. One morning, I couldn't find my house deed. That's when I knew this wasn't just Rachel being overprotective. It was surveillance. It was preparation. They wanted something from me. My home. My estate. My quiet consent. So I smiled. I waved. I let them think I was slipping. And then I bought my own cameras. But mine weren't for watching. They were for catching. My name is Walter Baines. I'm 72 years old. And until recently, I believed I'd raised a good man. My son Mark was a quiet boy growing up. Thoughtful, if a little timid. His mother, Darlene, used to say he had my eyes but her heart, soft, careful, easily bruised. I spent 30 years laying bricks and building homes for other people, but all I ever wanted was to build something solid for him. A life. A future. Something he could count on. Darlene passed in 2009. A rare and fast cancer. One of those things that seems impossible until the doctor says the word. I watched her shrink over 6 months into someone I didn't recognize. I held her hand at the end, and I made a promise I meant with every cell in my body: I'd look after Mark. No matter what. He was 27 when she died. Just starting out as a project manager for a mid-sized tech company. He moved back in for a while, said it was to help me grieve, but I knew it was more for him than me. I didn't mind. We were quiet men. We understood silence. Sometimes we'd sit in the living room with a basketball game on low and just exist, father and son, breathing in the space Darlene used to fill. He met Rachel at a conference in San Francisco. She was bright, sharp-tongued, ambitious in a way I'd never seen in someone her age. I was proud of Mark, truly. When he brought her over for the first time, she looked around my home: 3 bedrooms, hand-built cabinets, walls lined with family photos, and smiled like she was touring a quaint exhibit in a museum. "You've done well for yourself," she said, lips curved like she was tasting the paint. I laughed and offered her iced tea. She declined. She always declined simple things. Like she was too evolved for the world I'd built. They married 6 months later. I wasn't invited to the proposal, though I paid for the ring. "Rachel wanted a private moment," she said. "We'll send you the video," Mark told me, and I didn't realize then how prophetic those words would become. The first few years weren't bad. They visited on holidays. Rachel insisted they stay at a hotel, for convenience, though I had a guest room. I tried not to take it personally. I paid off their first mortgage when Rachel lost her job during a startup collapse. Mark didn't ask, I offered. They were struggling. It's what Darlene would have wanted. We were family. That's what I told myself. When they had their daughter, Lila, things changed. I wasn't allowed to babysit unless I completed an online CPR certification. Rachel said it was just policy. I passed it, twice. I never got to babysit. I adapted. I adjusted. I tried. But every year, I felt the space between me and my son stretching like taffy left out in the sun. Too much pull, too little give. After my fall last winter, black ice on the porch steps, I spent a week in the hospital and another month on crutches. That's when Rachel stepped in. "You shouldn't be alone anymore," she said. She said it with a smile. But something in her tone had the finality of a closed door. "I'm fine," I replied. "Of course," she answered, "but just in case, we'd feel better with some extra oversight." The first camera was installed in the living room. A small round device tucked under the bookshelf ledge. "For emergencies," Rachel said. "If something happens, we'll see it in real time and call for help." I nodded. It made sense. That one camera made sense. Then came the others. One in the hallway. One facing the kitchen. One, I later discovered, mounted near the vent in the bathroom. When I questioned it, Rachel brushed it off. "It doesn't face anything private. It's just in case you fall again, Walter. We care about you." "And Mark?" He just looked away. Like a man afraid to pick a side. Like a son who didn't want to see what was right in front of him. I spent a week pretending not to notice them. I moved through my house like a guest in a hotel, every step choreographed, every word filtered through the knowledge that someone might be listening. Watching. Judging. I started waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, heart racing. Not from fear of falling, but from the fear of not being trusted. Of being managed. One morning, I found a file open on my desk, Power of Attorney, draft. It wasn't mine. And it wasn't empty. They were preparing. Rachel and Mark were building a case. Against me. Quietly. Deliberately. Like a slow erosion of the man I used to be. That's when I bought the first camera. Not a flashy one. Just a discreet pen camera I placed in the kitchen, inside the pencil holder near the fridge. A test. Within 3 days, I captured Rachel speaking to someone on the phone. "We'll get the papers signed next week. He won't even read them. Mark thinks he's just confused." Confused. Like I was a child. Or a burden. Or worse, a fading signature they could press into a legal form and turn into money. That day, I called my friend Alan, an old buddy from the city planning department. He owed me a favor. "Alan," I said, "I need to make a few upgrades. Quiet ones." He laughed. "Planning on renovating?" "Something like that," I replied. But I wasn't renovating my house. I was rebuilding the balance of power. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. It came in small, careful doses, like the slow drip of poison in a glass of sweet tea. After that first pen camera confirmed my suspicion, I began to install others. A motion-activated camera above the front door, camouflaged as a light fixture. Another hidden inside the grandfather clock I'd inherited from my father. I even installed a voice recorder in the base of my old lamp in the study. It wasn't paranoia. It was insurance. And the return on my investment came fast. It was a Tuesday morning when I first heard them speak openly. Rachel had let herself in with the spare key. I was resting, according to the caregiver schedule she'd created for me, without asking. Mark was with her. I watched the footage later that night, after they left. "Did he sign the bank forms yet?" Rachel asked, rifling through a drawer where I kept my bills. "Not yet," Mark said. "He's asking questions. Keeps wanting to read everything line by line." Rachel sighed. "Of course he does. We need to move faster. The house is valued at over 800 grand now. If we wait too long, he might start getting suspicious." Mark was quiet. He looked tired. Worn down. Like a man losing pieces of himself in someone else's game. "I don't feel good about this, Rach." "Then don't think about it," she snapped. He's not using the money. What's the point of him sitting on all that equity just to rot in that chair? He's my dad. Rachel turned to him slowly. Her voice dropped an octave. And you're a father now, too. Don't you want Lila to have a better life? A better house? A backyard big enough for a swing set? Your dad had his time. This is ours. I watched my son nod. And in that nod, he disappeared. The man I raised, the boy who used to crawl into my lap with scraped knees and tears in his eyes, that boy was gone. Replaced by a stranger who thought legacy was something to be liquidated. The next time they visited, Rachel brought documents. Routine updates, she called them. Just some estate housekeeping. I told her I wanted to read them on my own. Her smile tightened. Of course, Walter. No rush. But there was a rush. I could see it in the way she texted furiously when she thought I wasn't watching. In the way Mark hovered by the hallway, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a man waiting for bad news to hurry up. I took the documents to my friend Alan. They're power of attorney papers, he confirmed. And once you sign these, they can legally sell the house. Move your assets. Even place you in care without your consent. I stared at the paper, my name typed cleanly under the line marked, Principal. I hadn't signed anything. Not yet. But they were counting on it. Planning around it. The footage from the clock camera revealed more. Rachel had brought in an appraiser, secretly. While I was supposedly at my weekly community center visit, she'd let a stranger into my home. He moved through the rooms like a real estate agent on a private tour, taking notes and photos. Hardwood's original, he asked. Yes. My father-in-law was very traditional. Home's in great shape. You'd get close to market peak if you list soon. Rachel smiled. That's the idea. Later that evening, when Mark returned for dinner, his once-a-week duty, now reduced to 30 minutes and checked off like a chore, he brought Lila. She ran up to me, arms wide, and I scooped her into my lap like always. For a brief moment, the world felt right again. Until Rachel said, Lila, sweetheart, tell Grandpa about the new house we might get. Lila giggled. With the pool. Rachel beamed. Yes, honey. If things go smoothly, we'll have it by summer. Mark looked down at his plate. He didn't say a word. That night, I sat in my den and watched the footage again. The small things. The subtle things. Rachel making calls behind closed doors. Mark pacing the hallway, whispering into his phone. And then I found the one video I hadn't expected. The one from the kitchen, 3 days prior. Rachel was alone. On speakerphone. Walter's almost there, she said to someone I didn't recognize. The memory angle is working. He's asking more questions, but still thinks we're helping. We'll schedule the final signing for next week. And then, in a lower voice, once it's done, we'll get him into assisted living. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep him comfortable while we sell. Sell. The house. The furniture. Everything. He's not going to need it. The voice on the other end laughed. Rachel laughed too. That's when I felt it. Not just the sting of betrayal. But the final, full silence of abandonment. My son was watching me disappear in real time. And doing nothing to stop it. I closed my laptop that night and sat alone in the dark. Not crying. Not shouting. Just still. I looked around the home I'd built with my bare hands. The baseboards I'd sanded, the crown molding I'd measured with care. The porch I'd rebuilt after the first snowstorm with Mark at my side, holding the nails in a small red bucket. They were going to sell it all. And me along with it. That was the moment I stopped being afraid. And started planning. It's a strange thing, to know you're being erased. Not in a loud, cinematic way. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, no fiery declarations. Just the quiet, surgical process of removal. Like being peeled off the pages of your own life, layer by careful layer, until nothing familiar remains. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to eat. I made toast, watched it brown, even spread the butter so it melted in neat rivulets. But I never took a bite. I just stood there in the kitchen, watching the clock tick toward a morning I no longer trusted. I had the house to myself. But it didn't feel like mine. I sat in my armchair, the one Darlene used to call my throne, and stared at the fireplace Rachel had once called quaint. Every object in the room suddenly looked like a memory I was supposed to pack away. That chair. Bought after Mark's graduation, when he landed his first job and we thought the world was ours. The painting over the mantel. A birthday gift from Darlene, picked up from a roadside market because she liked how the trees leaned toward each other. The carpet. The one Lila crawled on last year, giggling and gumming at the corners while I played peekaboo. They didn't see those things. They saw square footage. Appraisal value. Capital. My life was now a line item in someone else's spreadsheet. The worst part wasn't the deception. It was the indifference. Mark never called unless Rachel prompted him. Lila hadn't visited in weeks. When I texted, I'd get one-word replies, sure, maybe, busy, or worse, nothing at all. I began talking aloud in the house, just to hear a voice. Sometimes I'd speak to Darlene's photo, asking her what she would do. Sometimes I asked her if I'd failed. If I'd been too soft. Too blind. Too willing to believe the best in people who'd already made up their minds. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd wake at 2 a.m., heart pounding, unsure of what I'd dreamt. I'd pace the hallway in slippers, tracing the same steps I used to walk when Mark had colic as a baby. Back then, he needed me. He trusted me. Now, he was setting me aside like a coat that no longer fit. And still, I didn't act. Not yet. Because part of me hoped it was a mistake. That Rachel had pushed too hard, and Mark would pull back. That he'd show up one afternoon and say, "Dad, I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." That he'd look me in the eye and see me again. But that moment never came. Instead, he showed up one Saturday with coffee and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He sat down at the kitchen table, my table, the one I refinished with Darlene during the first year of our marriage, and placed a manila envelope between us. "No pressure, Dad," he said gently. "These are just estate documents. You don't have to do anything with them today." Rachel thought it'd be good to get them out of the way. I didn't touch the envelope. Mark sipped his coffee and looked around the room like a man evaluating a rental. "You know," he said, "this place has held up really well." I waited. He added, "If we ever do decide to sell, I think we could get top dollar." "That's all I'm saying. We could get top dollar." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't trust myself to speak. Mark took my silence as permission. "You're not alone, Dad. We just want what's best for you." I stood slowly. He looked up at me, his expression expectant. But I didn't answer. I walked to the window instead, stared out at the bird feeder I'd refilled just that morning. A robin landed. Pecked. Flew off. I closed my eyes. In that moment, I knew I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was empty. And that emptiness? It was quiet. Still. Heavy. I lived in that stillness for 3 more days. Didn't answer texts. Didn't return Rachel's call when she asked if I'd had a chance to look at the papers. Didn't speak to the delivery guy who left my groceries at the porch and waved through the screen door. I was disappearing from my own life. And they were letting me. That's what broke me. Not their schemes. Not the legal tricks. But the ease with which they allowed my vanishing. It was never about paperwork or property. It was about love that had turned into management. And legacy that had been downgraded into leverage. I sat in the dark that night. No TV. No lights. Just me and the rhythmic click of the grandfather clock's pendulum, the sound of time swinging forward, uncaring. I watched the footage one last time, the one from the kitchen camera. Rachel laughing with her friend about shuffling Walter into a cozy little home. "She won't even need the master suite," she'd said. "We'll convert it into a home office." God, can you imagine the light in there? As if I were already gone. As if my chair, my bed, my breath meant nothing. I turned off the recording. And for a long while, I just sat there, the cursor blinking on a blank screen. My life, waiting to be rewritten. It happened in the middle of a Tuesday. There was no epiphany. No dramatic lightning strike of fury. Just the quiet, undeniable realization that if I didn't act soon, I'd lose everything, quietly, legally, and with a notarized smile. I was folding laundry. My clothes, still warm from the dryer, filled the room with that gentle cotton scent Darlene used to say reminded her of clean beginnings. And as I folded my sweaters, something shifted. I looked at my hands, veined, calloused, steadied by decades of work, and thought, these are not the hands of a man who fades quietly. I set down the laundry. Walked to my filing cabinet. Opened the drawer labeled Originals. There it was, the deed. My name. No co-signers. No trusts. No addendums. Just Walter H. Baines, in black ink, etched into ownership. I held the paper with both hands, let the weight of it settle into my bones. I wasn't a guest in this house. I was this house. Every joist. Every beam. Every coat of paint. I'd laid it all with my own hands. Mark might have been born here, but I was the architect of every inch. Rachel may have seen a future here, but I'd built a life. And they thought they could erase me with documents and decor. I set the deed on the table. Opened my laptop. Typed 2 words into the search bar, real estate attorney. The first few results were flashy, firms with marble lobbies and too many initials in their names. But the fourth one made me pause. Glenn Parks, Estate Planning and Senior Advocacy. I clicked. The website was plain. No gimmicks. No pop-ups. Just a tagline, "We protect the people who built this world." I made the call. "Mr. Parks," I said after his receptionist patched me through. "I need to make sure what's mine stays mine." There was a long pause. Then his voice, calm, low, measured. "Let's talk." We met the next day at a modest office park across town. He was maybe 60, with silver hair and a firm handshake that didn't try to dominate, just reassure. I laid out everything, calmly, methodically. The cameras. The forged documents. The secret appraiser visit. The power of attorney papers. The pressure. The whispers. The plan to move me like a pawn. He didn't flinch. Instead, he asked one question, "Do you want to stay in the house?" I looked around his office, family photos on the shelf, a cup of lukewarm tea beside a stack of files. "No," I said. "I want to choose how I leave." His eyes twinkled slightly. "Then let's do this right." That afternoon, I signed a durable power of attorney, one that placed full control with Glenn and no one else. He arranged for the deed to be quietly reviewed and insulated from tampering. We created a living trust with a clause, upon my passing, the house would be sold, and the profits donated to a fund for veterans, in Darlene's name. Mark and Rachel wouldn't get a cent. Not out of malice. But out of clarity. They'd already spent their inheritance in advance, on manipulation. Glenn offered to initiate a cease and desist letter about the unauthorized surveillance. I told him not yet. There was still something I needed. Proof. Real proof. I'd already captured Rachel's voice. Her laughter. Her greed. But I wanted their reaction. Not because I needed it emotionally, but because I needed them to see what it felt like to be recorded. The next Sunday, I invited them over. Said I wanted to go over the estate papers together. Rachel arrived with a folder in hand. Mark followed, quiet, hands in pockets. We sat in the living room. I had tea ready. Rachel sipped hers. So, Walter, are we ready to finalize things? I nodded. Almost. I reached into my sweater pocket. Set a small black device on the coffee table. A recording pen. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room. He won't even read them. Mark thinks he's just confused. Rachel's face drained of color. Mark stiffened. I pressed a second button. Another clip. We'll get him into assisted living. Nothing fancy. The room went still. I let the silence stretch. Then I looked at Mark. I heard every word. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Rachel recovered first. That's illegal. You can't record people without consent. I didn't install hidden cameras in your bathroom, I replied. She shut her mouth. I stood slowly. You came into my home, I said softly, not to help, but to harvest. I turned to Mark. My son, the one I gave everything for, stood by and watched. Mark's voice cracked. Dad, I didn't. No, I interrupted. You didn't. And that's the point. Rachel stood, grabbing her purse. We're leaving. This is offensive. I nodded toward the door. You'll find it still opens. For now. As they left, I said one final thing. I'm selling the house. You'll get no notice. You'll get no keys. And you'll get no piece of what you tried to steal. They paused at the doorway, Rachel glaring, Mark still silent. Why? She asked, almost desperate. Why do this now? I looked at the floorboards I'd laid with Darlene in '82. Because I built this life to be lived. Not inherited by liars. Then I closed the door. Softly. Deliberately. And locked it. For the last time, I was no longer waiting to be acted upon. I had become the action. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue, accuse, or beg for understanding. Instead, I disappeared, quietly, from the role they had assigned me. I stopped replying to texts. When Mark sent a half-hearted, "Hey, just checking in," I let it sit unread. When Rachel followed up with, "Let's not let one conversation define our future," I turned off read receipts entirely. Let them guess. Let them wonder. The locks were changed within 48 hours. Glenn handled it through a trusted contractor. No invoices sent to the house. No calls made during daylight hours. Discretion was part of the design. The security system was upgraded too, ironically, in the very spaces Rachel had once turned into surveillance zones. Now the only cameras inside were mine, and they pointed where I wanted them to. I shut down the spare key fob Mark had never returned. One by one, I erased every access point they had to my life. And then, I took it further. I called the bank where I'd co-signed on Mark and Rachel's mortgage 3 years ago, during a rough patch they'd assured me was temporary. I need to formally revoke my co-signer responsibilities, I said. The banker frowned. That's not standard protocol, Mr. Baines. But you can require them to refinance in their own name. Then send them the deadline, I replied. 60 days. Or I'll notify the loan as due in full. The letter went out certified. I didn't include a note. I wanted the message to come in the language they understood best, terms, deadlines, and risk. I also contacted the financial advisor I'd referred Mark to years ago, the same one managing the modest investment account I'd set up for Lila. "I'd like to close the account," I said. "Of course, Mr. Baines. Would you like to transfer the funds to another beneficiary?" "No. I'd like to use them myself. I'm planning a trip." That was true. I was planning a trip. To the coast. To the cliffs Darlene and I used to walk during summers. I booked a week-long stay in a quiet inn by the sea. Paid in full. Because revenge isn't just about subtraction. It's about redirection. The furniture Rachel had quietly tagged for removal in her new layout plan. I donated it all to a women's shelter across town. They came in a bright blue truck, full of gratitude and gloves. They asked no questions. Took everything with care. And when I stood in the empty living room, sunlight bouncing off bare walls, I didn't feel loss. I felt weightlessness. Mark and Rachel came by one afternoon, unannounced. I watched from the upstairs window as they stood on the porch, trying their old key, then ringing the bell. I didn't answer. I sat in my study, drinking tea from the mug Darlene had hand-painted decades ago. Walter's world. Everyone else is just visiting. They knocked. Waited. Tried to call. Eventually, they left. I watched Rachel pull out her phone as they walked down the driveway, likely texting a lawyer, trying to see if they had a case. They didn't. Glenn had made sure of that. 3 days later, I received an email from Mark. Subject line, "Dad, please. Can we talk?" I didn't open it. Not out of spite. But because I finally understood the difference between attention and love. He had given me attention when it suited him. But love? Love would have meant protecting me from the very woman who saw me as an obstacle. Love would have meant stopping her, not standing beside her while she plotted my undoing. I printed the email and fed it through the shredder. One afternoon, I got a call from Lila's preschool. They'd listed me as an emergency contact. Rachel must have forgotten to update the form. "There's been no emergency, Mr. Baines," the woman said kindly. "Just a routine update. Would you like us to remove you from the list?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "Keep me on." She paused. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I replied. "But if anyone else calls pretending to be me, don't believe them." That week, I sent Lila a package. Not to their house, but directly to her school. Inside was a simple storybook I'd once read to Mark, The Gardener's Promise. I wrote a note inside the cover. "Some things grow quietly, little one. But they grow strong. Grandpa Walter." That was my legacy. Not a house. Not bank accounts. But the seed of resilience in a girl too young to know what fences were being built around her. 2 weeks later, my house was listed for sale. Glenn arranged it through a third party. No open houses. No neighborhood alerts. It sold in 3 days, cash buyer. I didn't even return for the final walkthrough. I'd already said goodbye to every inch of it in my own way. And now, I lived elsewhere. Not just in location. But in identity. No longer manageable. No longer watched. And no longer willing to apologize for existing. The fallout didn't come in one dramatic wave, it came in ripples, subtle and relentless. It began with the refinancing notice. 60 days. That's what the letter said. Just 2 months to requalify for a loan on a home they couldn't afford without my signature. Mark called the bank first, trying to reason. Then Rachel tried, louder, more insistent, more entitled. The answer didn't change, refinance or forfeit the loan. I wasn't on the calls, but I heard about them. Glenn forwarded me the reports, a flurry of late-night emails, escalating requests for extensions, Mark's credit application marked, pending review due to unstable income history. They'd been living on borrowed time. On borrowed money. And the bank had finally noticed. A week later, I received an envelope. No return address. Inside, a handwritten letter from Mark. Not an apology. Just confusion. Why are you doing this? That was the first line. Not what did we do? Not how can we fix this? But why are you doing this? As though I had broken something. As though I had flipped the board mid-game because I didn't like the rules. Rachel stopped pretending soon after. I received a cease and desist letter from her attorney, some boutique firm in the city, accusing me of malicious interference with family assets. Glenn laughed when he read it. She knows she has no standing, he said, tossing it aside. But people like her file threats the way others send invitations. Loud, flashy, and ultimately meaningless. Meanwhile, the story started leaking. Not because I shared it, but because silence makes people curious. Rachel's co-workers began asking why she was so tense. Mark's boss inquired why he was preoccupied during meetings. Apparently, Mark had mentioned something about legal family matters to a co-worker. The co-worker mentioned it to someone else. Within a week, the whispers had become a windstorm. Mark's promotion, something Rachel had banked on, was quietly delayed. Lila's school called to confirm if the family's address was changing. The teacher said Rachel had snapped during pickup, scolding the staff for asking invasive questions. That's how pressure works. Not all at once. But piece by piece. At the end of their refinance window, they couldn't qualify. The house went on the market. But unlike mine, it didn't sell quickly. Rachel had designed it with opulence in mind, marble countertops, imported fixtures, high-maintenance landscaping. It was showy, not livable. They had to cut the price 3 times in 6 weeks. When it finally sold, the profit was modest, barely enough to clear the mortgage. Not enough for the new house with a backyard swing set. They downsized to a condo across town. I heard about it from Lila's teacher. She mentioned they don't have a yard anymore, she said. She seemed sad. That part stung more than I'd expected. Not because I wanted Lila to suffer, but because innocence always bears the cost of ego. Still, I reminded myself, she'd have more use for a storybook than a backyard designed by betrayal. Rachel eventually stopped calling. Stopped emailing. But she didn't stop watching. I know this because Glenn's office intercepted a quiet request she'd made to access parts of my financial history, through an online data broker. They denied it. Flagged her name for future notice. We can report her, Glenn said. Make it official. I shook my head. Not yet. The consequences were already writing themselves. Mark called again. Twice. Left voicemails I didn't play. His third call came on a Sunday. I let it go to voicemail again. But this time, he left a message. Dad, he said, his voice small. I don't know how we got here. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for money. He just sounded tired. Like someone who had finally looked in the mirror and seen the gap between who they were and who they'd become. I saved that voicemail. Not as comfort. But as evidence that even when you burn bridges, sometimes the smoke carries a signal back. Rachel, from what I gathered, was less reflective. She'd applied for a job at a nonprofit 6 months later, something about youth mentorship. Someone on the board flagged her during the background review. They didn't say why she was passed over. But I have my guesses. Mark and I haven't spoken directly since that Sunday call. But Glenn receives updates. So I know that he renewed his therapist subscription. That he asked about restoring joint custody paperwork, something Rachel had resisted before. That he's attending sessions alone, once a week, and hasn't invited Rachel to join him. They're still married, for now. But they're not living in the same place. And the silence between them is the same one they once imposed on me. Consequences don't always roar. Sometimes, they whisper. Sometimes, they just wait. Until one morning, you look around and realize the empire you built on someone else's sacrifice has no foundation left. Only dust. It had been nearly 6 months since I'd last seen either of them in person. Not since the day they stood on my porch, trying to unlock a door that no longer opened for them. I didn't reach out. Didn't poke the wound. I let the silence speak for me, and it spoke clearly. Until one Thursday afternoon, I received an invitation. Hand-delivered, handwritten. It was from Mark. A small card, cream-colored, tucked into a plain envelope. Lila's school play. This Friday at 6. She's asked for you. If you're willing. There was no signature. No apology. But in those words, I felt something different. Not a plea. Not manipulation. A small, cracked window of honesty. I almost didn't go. But I remembered the storybook I sent her. The one about the gardener who protected fragile seeds from the wind. And how some things, despite the cold, still bloom. So I went. I wore my best jacket. The navy one Darlene liked, the one she said made me look like someone who could still surprise people. The auditorium was filled with laughter, chatter, crinkling programs. Parents waved to each other across the aisles. Kids peeked through the red curtain. I sat in the back. A seat near the aisle. Unnoticed. Until Lila walked on stage, dressed like a tree. She had a cardboard trunk around her waist, green paper leaves on her arms. When her line came, she beamed. And some trees grow slow, she said, but they grow strong. That was it. That was her whole part. But she said it proudly. She didn't look at her parents in the front row. She looked straight toward the back. Straight at me. Afterward, I waited outside. The breeze was cool. Leaves were just beginning to turn. I wasn't sure I wanted to speak to either of them. I thought about slipping away. But then the doors opened, and they came out. Mark saw me first. He hesitated, then walked over alone. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly. It meant a lot to her. I nodded. She did well. There was a pause. He shifted awkwardly. Then, without prompting, he said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I said nothing. Because I needed to see if he meant it. He continued. I let her talk me into things. I told myself it was for the family. That you'd understand. That you'd bounce back. He looked down at his hands. But I should have protected you. I didn't. I failed you. I studied him. He looked older. More fragile. Not like a boy who'd grown up. Like a man who'd grown through. "I don't need your apology," I said finally. His face fell. "But I do need you to mean it." "I do," he said. "I do." "I know," I said. "That's why I came." We stood in silence for a while, watching families hug and laugh in the parking lot. Rachel lingered by the curb with Lila, her arms crossed. "She didn't want me to invite you," Mark admitted. "I know. She's angry. About the house. The money." "Of course she is," I said. "You can't steal what was never offered, and then act wounded when it's reclaimed." He laughed, softly. "That sounds like something you'd say." "It is something I said," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing not the father he'd known, but the man he'd misjudged. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. Even when I didn't deserve it." "You didn't," I said gently. He swallowed. "I know. I gave anyway," I added. That's what made it a gift. Another silence. This one softer. Will you come to dinner? He asked. Just with Lila and me. No expectations. No Rachel. No Rachel. I considered. Then shook my head. Not yet. He didn't protest. Just nodded. I understand. As he turned to leave, I called out, Mark. He turned. You've still got time, I said. For what? To become someone worth your daughter's trust. He didn't smile. But he nodded, slowly, like someone accepting a truth too long avoided. Then he walked to his car. Lila waved at me from the back seat. I waved back. Rachel never looked in my direction. But that was fine. Because not all confrontations need to be loud. Some just need to be final. It's funny what peace actually feels like. It doesn't come with fanfare. No grand gestures. No parades of closure. It's more like a clean kitchen at dawn. The hum of the refrigerator. The sound of a spoon tapping gently against ceramic. A room not filled with tension or expectation, just space. Honest, unclaimed space. After selling the house, I moved into a smaller home near the coast. Not flashy. Not expensive. Just mine. A porch that faces the sea. A bedroom that catches the morning light. And a front door that only opens when I choose. I filled the new house slowly. A second-hand couch with firm cushions. A bookshelf, half full, waiting for new stories. Darlene's photograph on the mantel. She's smiling in that way she always did when she knew something I hadn't figured out yet. Sometimes I speak to her out loud. Not in grief. In partnership. You were right, I told her one morning, folding laundry. I gave too much. But I finally learned when to stop. The neighborhood is quiet. Not lonely. Just peaceful. There's a small grocery store where the clerks know my name. A library where I volunteer on Fridays, shelving books in the history section. A community center that smells of linoleum and hope. I joined a walking group. Seniors, mostly. People who've also lost and also rebuilt. We talk about weather, and hip replacements, and the weird, patient strength it takes to keep reinventing yourself after 70. I don't speak much about Mark. When I do, it's simple. My son's finding his way. They nod. They understand. Lila sends postcards now. Not often. But enough. She draws pictures on the backs. Little trees, some with faces. Sometimes she writes, Grandpa, do trees really grow slow because they're thinking? I write back, yes. And the smartest ones grow in all directions. Rachel doesn't write. That, too, is its own kind of peace. No more performances. No more layers. Just quiet distance. A boundary that no longer needs explanation. Mark visited once. He brought Lila. Just the two of them. She ran through the new house like it was a secret garden. Asked about everything. Touched everything. Sat on my lap like no time had passed. Mark didn't say much. But he looked around like a man stepping into something sacred. He noticed the hand-carved table. The old, worn kettle. The framed photo of Darlene. It's peaceful here, he said. It is. I see why you left. I didn't leave, I corrected gently. I returned to myself. He nodded. He hasn't been back yet. But I think he will. When he's ready. Because that's what peace does. It waits. It doesn't chase. It doesn't demand. It simply offers a seat, empty, open, available. And lets others decide when they're strong enough to sit in it. One morning, I stood barefoot on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the fog drift across the ocean. The sun was just beginning to rise, gold spilling over the water like spilled tea. I breathed in. The air didn't smell like resentment. Or fear. Or loss. It smelled like salt. And pine. And maybe, just maybe, beginning. I didn't film it. Didn't document it. Some moments aren't meant to be recorded. Some are just meant to be lived. They filmed me without asking, because they thought I wouldn't notice. Because they thought an old man couldn't see through quiet betrayal and carefully folded lies. But I watched them. I watched with patience. I watched with memory. I watched with love that had finally learned its limit. And when I filmed what they didn't want seen, I wasn't capturing revenge. I was recording a moment of clarity. A line drawn not in anger, but in resolve. They thought the camera gave them power. But I knew something they didn't. The truest power isn't in what you capture. It's in what you choose to keep, and what you finally, bravely let go. And in the stillness after the story ends, you find yourself whole again. Not because they remembered who you were, but because you finally did.